In today's video, I'm gonna go over the differences between going no contact, shutting down, the silent treatment, and ghosting. Picture this. Your partner suddenly stops responding mid-argument and walks away. Your friend hasn't texted you back in 3 weeks. Your colleague is giving you the cold shoulder at work. Are these all the same thing? Absolutely not. And understanding the difference could completely change how you handle these situations and protect your own mental health. By the end of this video, you'll never confuse shutting down, the silent treatment, ghosting, and going no contact ever again. We're going to break down exactly what each of these behaviors looks like, why people do them, how to recognize them in your own relationships, and most importantly, how to respond to each one appropriately. Because your response to being ghosted should be completely different from your response to someone who's emotionally shutting down. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of any of these behaviors, you know how confusing and painful it can be when you don't understand what's really happening. So let's start with the most commonly misunderstood one, emotionally shutting down. And pay attention because you might recognize this pattern in yourself or someone close to you. Shutting down happens when someone becomes emotionally overwhelmed during a conversation or conflict. Their nervous system essentially hits the brakes and they go silent or physically remove themselves from the situation. This isn't a conscious choice to hurt you, it's actually their brain's way of protecting both of you from escalation. You'll recognize shutting down because it happens in the moment. 1 minute you're having a discussion, maybe it's getting heated, and suddenly the other person stops talking and looks away, or says something like, "I can't do this right now," and just walks away. Here's what's actually happening in their brain. When we get emotionally flooded, our amygdala, the alarm system in our brain, takes over. Blood flow shifts away from the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for logical thinking and communication. Essentially, they've temporarily lost access to their ability to process and respond rationally. Dr. John Gottman's research shows that when our heart rate goes above 100 beats per minute during conflict, we literally cannot think clearly. The person who shuts down isn't choosing to be difficult. Their nervous system just cannot handle it. They might feel overwhelmed, attacked, or like anything they say will make things worse. This response is actually rooted in our survival instincts. When faced with perceived threat, our body prepares for fight, flight, or freeze. Shutting down is essentially the freeze response, the nervous system's way of protecting us when fighting seems too risky and fleeing feels impossible. What makes this particularly challenging is that the person experiencing it often can't articulate what's happening to them in the moment. They might not even fully understand it themselves until much later. Now, here's where it gets problematic. The person who shuts down usually doesn't come back to repair the conversation. They might feel better after some time alone, but they often avoid bringing up the topic again because it feels uncomfortable or they're worried about triggering another overwhelming situation. Meanwhile, the other person is left hanging. They were in the middle of trying to resolve something important and now they feel abandoned, dismissed, or like they have to chase after their partner or friend to get closure. They begin walking on eggshells, suppressing their own needs to avoid triggering another shutdown. Through time, this leads to resentment and emotional distance, as unresolved issues continue piling up and intimacy slowly fades away. Let me give you a concrete example. Two people are discussing finances. One brings up concerns about spending and the conversation starts getting tense. The other suddenly stops responding. They stare at the floor and then gets up and just leaves the room. When asked what's going on, they say, "I just need some space right now," and close the door. They aren't trying to punish or manipulate. They're genuinely overwhelmed and need time to regulate their emotions. But the person left behind feels cut off and unheard, especially if this pattern keeps repeating. What's particularly challenging about shutting down is that it often happens at the worst possible times, right when important conversations need to happen. Now, let's move to something very different. Going no contact. Unlike shutting down, which happens in the heat of the moment, going no contact is a deliberate, conscious decision to cut off communication for the sake of emotional safety. No contact usually comes after a long period of struggle, hurt, or repeated patterns that haven't changed despite multiple attempts to address them. People typically choose no contact in several situations. First, when they've been in a relationship with someone who's constantly manipulative, abusive, or neglectful. This could be a romantic partner partner, family member, or friend who has crossed boundaries repeatedly. Second, when they feel emotionally disconnected and like their needs have been dismissed or invalidated for months or years. They might have tried to communicate their concerns multiple times, but nothing ever changed. Third, when continuing contact feels genuinely unsafe, physically, emotionally, or psychologically. This is often the case with toxic family members or ex-partners who refuse to respect boundaries. The decision to go no contact is rarely made lightly. It often comes with significant emotional costs, losing family connections, ending long-term friendships, or walking away from relationships that once brought a lot of joy. People who choose no contact typically do so because they've reached a breaking point where protecting their mental health takes priority over maintaining the relationship. Here's what most people don't understand about no contact. It's rarely a sudden decision. There's usually a long process that leads up to it. The person might have tried having conversations, setting smaller boundaries, taking breaks, or even seeking therapy or mediation. Going no contact is often a last resort when someone realizes the relationship is causing more harm than good, and the other person is unwilling or unable to change the dynamic. It's not about punishment, it's about self-preservation. This process often involves what us therapists call the extinction burst. This is when someone realizes their usual methods aren't working. They might temporarily escalate their harmful behavior or try to regain control. This can make the period leading up to going no contact particularly difficult and can strengthen the person's resolve that cutting contact is necessary. There's also often a grieving process involved with going no contact. The person isn't just losing the current relationship, they're grieving the relationship they hope to have, the family dynamics that they wish existed, or the friend they thought this person could be. This grief can be complicated because it involves losing someone who's still alive but choosing not to have them in your life. Here is an example. Someone has been trying for years to have a healthier relationship with a parent who constantly criticizes, guilt trips, and dismisses their feelings. They've tried setting boundaries, having heartfelt conversations, and even therapy sessions together, but nothing changed. The parent continues the same patterns, and the person realizes that every interaction leaves them feeling anxious and drained, so they make the difficult decision to stop responding to calls and texts for their own mental health. What makes no contact particularly misunderstood is that it can look cruel or punitive from the outside. People might say things like, "But it's your family," or "You're being too sensitive." However, for the person making this choice, it's often the healthiest option available after exhausting other alternatives. Now let's talk about ghosting, which often gets confused with no contact, but they're actually very different. Ghosting is when someone abruptly cuts off all communication without any explanation. Usually this happens in the early stages of dating or friendship. The key difference is that ghosting typically happens when there hasn't been a significant conflict or pattern of harm. It's not about safety or boundaries, it's about avoidance and discomfort from difficult conversations. People ghost for several reasons, but it usually comes down to one thing. They don't know how to communicate discomfort or deliver disappointing news. Maybe they're not interested in pursuing the relationship further, but they don't want to hurt the other person's feelings. Or maybe they feel overwhelmed by the other person's interest level and don't know how to address it directly. Ironically, their attempt to avoid hurting someone usually causes more confusion and pain than honest conversation would have. The person being ghosted is left wondering what happened, questioning themselves, and sometimes even worrying about the ghoster's safety. Modern technology has made ghosting easier than ever before. It's simple to just stop responding to texts, ignore calls, and avoid the discomfort of explaining why you don't want to continue the relationship. The psychology behind ghosting often involves conflict avoidance and people-pleasing tendencies. Many people who ghost genuinely believe they're being kinder by avoiding a difficult conversation. They might think, if I just fade away, they'll get the hint and won't be as hurt as if I told them directly that I'm not interested. This reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of how rejection actually works and what closure means to people. Ghosting happens most commonly in dating scenarios. Someone you've been texting with for a few weeks who just suddenly stops responding, or someone you went on a few dates with who disappears without any explanation. But it also happens in friendships, especially newer ones, or even in professional situations like job interviews or networking connections. Ghosting typically happens in casual or developing relationships. What's particularly harmful about ghosting is that it leaves the other person without closure or understanding. They're forced to fill in the blanks themselves, often assuming they did something wrong or that the ghoster is in some kind of trouble. This ambiguity can be more painful than a clear rejection because it prevents the person from processing the loss and moving forward. Here's a typical ghosting scenario. Two people match on a dating app, they text for weeks and go on 3 dates. One realizes that they're not feeling a romantic connection, but the other seems really interested. Instead of having an awkward conversation, the person just stops responding. They think they're being kind by avoiding discomfort, but the other person is left confused, wondering if they did something wrong or if something happened. The rise of dating apps and social media has normalized ghosting to some degree, with many people viewing it as an acceptable way to end casual interactions. However, this normalization doesn't address the emotional impact on those being ghosted or help people develop better communication skills. Finally, let's shift to the last one, the silent treatment. Of all of these behaviors, this is the most manipulative. The silent treatment is when someone is physically present but intentionally ignoring you. They're there, but they're acting like you don't exist. This is fundamentally different from the others because it's not about emotional regulation, safety, or avoidance. It's about power and control. The silent treatment is designed to punish, make you feel guilty, or force you to give in. You'll know it's the silent treatment because the person is deliberately making their silence obvious. They might be in the same room as you but refuse to acknowledge your presence. They'll answer other people but not you. They might slam doors, do chores aggressively, or give you cold stares. The key difference is the intentional nature of it. Someone who's emotionally overwhelmed will usually remove themselves. Someone giving you the silent treatment wants to make sure you feel their displeasure while they remain present. The silent treatment is a form of emotional withholding that's designed to create anxiety and desperation in the other person. It's a way of saying, I am so upset with you that you don't even deserve my acknowledgement. This creates a particularly cruel form of psychological pressure. What makes the silent treatment especially insidious is that it forces the other person into a position of having to guess what they did wrong and how to fix it. The person giving the silent treatment maintains power by withholding information about what the problem is or what would help resolve it. This creates a dynamic where the target of the silent treatment often becomes increasingly desperate to restore communication, sometimes apologizing for things they didn't do or compromising their own values. The silent treatment is actually a form of emotional abuse. It's designed to make you feel anxious, guilty, and desperate for approval. It pushes you into apologizing for things you didn't do wrong or giving in just to restore communication. The silent treatment weaponizes this natural human need for connection and communication. When the silent treatment is used repeatedly in relationships, it can cause lasting damage to a person's mental health and self-worth. The silent treatment often escalates over time. What might start as a few hours of cold shoulder can extend to days or even weeks, with the person becoming increasingly dramatic in their displays of displeasure. They might make exaggerated sighs, engage in passive-aggressive behaviors, or recruit others to join in the exclusion. Here is what it looks like. Two people disagree about a household rule. Instead of continuing the conversation or taking a break, one spends the next 3 days barely acknowledging the other. Unlike the other behaviors we've discussed, the silent treatment has no real constructive purpose. Shutting down serves to prevent escalation. No contact protects from harm. Even ghosting, though problematic, attempts to avoid hurting someone else's feelings. The silent treatment exists solely to punish and control, making it the most toxic of these communication patterns. Understanding these distinctions is crucial because each behavior requires a different response and has different implications for the relationship. Your response to each one should be completely different. If someone shuts down, give them space, but also agree on a plan to reconnect. If someone goes no contact, respect it. If someone ghosts you, don't chase, move on. If someone gives you the silent treatment, don't reward the behavior. Call it out calmly. I notice you're not speaking to me. This doesn't feel like a healthy way to handle our disagreement. Instead of ghosting, try saying, I've enjoyed getting to know you, but I don't feel like we are a match. That's it for today's video. If you like this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you, and see you in the next one.